Mother Goose, the quails are in the nest. Hello, my name is Will, and this is Exploding Helicopter, the podcast bursting out of a birthday cake wearing nothing but its birthday suit. Now, after making his name with a string of modestly budgeted action films, Steven Seagal catapulted himself into A-list stardom with a maritime-themed spin on Die Hard. His time at the top didn't last long, though, as the ponytailed pugilist promptly blew up his entire career with a eco-themed vanity project and then sabotaged what remained of his career with some of the most disinterested and disengaged performances ever committed to DVD. That is a tale for another podcast because here we're looking at the pinnacle of the Aikido arm waver's career. It's 1992's Under Siege. Joining me to discuss the film is a man I've dragged away from preparing 50 gallons of bouillabaisse. And will someone please take his pies out of the oven? It's returning champion, Nicholas Rehag. How you doing, buddy?
I am doing great, and I'm excited to talk about this movie.
Well, I thought you would be excited to talk about this movie. I mean, just how pumped are you to be doing this show?
On a scale of 1 to 10, I think I'm a 9, 9.5, if I'm going to be honest.
That's good. Well, hopefully by the end of this show, we can get you up to that full 10, or maybe all the way up to 11. Who knows?
Ooh.
But, well, we all, I think it's fair to say, have a curious relationship with Steven Seagal. And, as far as I understand it, yours is as odd as anyone's. So, yeah, do you want to care to tell our listeners about it?
Yeah, absolutely. My middle school years, so we're talking the early 2000s, I would spend a lot of time at my grandmother's house. My parents were working, and I would just, go to my grandmother's for 2 or 3 days and then come home and that kind of thing. And my grandmother introduced me to a lot of films. She introduced me to Star Trek. She introduced me to the Mission Impossible films, the Rodgers and Hammerstein's musicals, and more importantly, she introduced me to Steven Seagal, who was her favorite actor until Vin Diesel came around, and now she's very keen on Vin Diesel. It's
She's got
absurd.
quite some taste. She's got
She
quite some taste.
She does, and she has a impressive DVD collection. She has Above the Law, Hard to Kill, Out for Justice, Under Siege, On Deadly Ground, Under Siege 2, Glimmerman, Fire Down Below, Patriot, Exit Wounds, and I'm fairly certain she has Half Past Dead on DVD as well. It's absurd, but one of the first ones she ever showed me was Under Siege. And when I was a kid watching it, I thought it was really wild. I'm like, oh, man, look at all this stuff that's happening. And it happened to be my first introduction to on-screen nudity. And she forgot that scene happened, so she very panicked pressing buttons to pass it along. And unfortunately, she kept hitting like pause and stop and play. So I saw a lot more than what she was comfortable with. And that kind of got me on my journey of like, oh, I didn't know films could do this. Because until then, you watch kind of, I don't want to say childish films, but films geared more towards me and my age bracket. So this was kind of that next step of like, here's what the adults watch. And it's been a wild ride ever since.
I had no idea what a formative experience Under Siege was or is in your life, Nick. So, yeah, I'm even more delighted that we are doing this particular film together. But I am particularly intrigued, as much as I, want to understand your relationship with Steven Seagal. I'm now really fascinated in learning about your grandmother's interest in the great ponytailed martial artist. So what is it? What was the appeal of Steven Seagal to her?
She always liked action films. My grandfather, who passed when I was really young, he was big into stock car racing. So, your NASCAR, not necessarily Formula One, but some of the other types of racing. So he was always into these big, like, adrenaline and action type films. And my grandmother just kind of followed behind him and started watching some more of these like Chuck Norris films, films that tended to have more of a martial arts slant to it. But like I said, she also had a very different side, a real 180, if you will, with the musicals. And she also introduced me to the TV show and film Stargate. So she also had a very big science fiction type background. And it's just absurd saying all of this out loud, because you wouldn't think like, oh, I think she's like 86 or 87 now, your old grandmother is hanging out whenever she's watching NCIS or she's watching MASH. She's like, "Oh, my shows are on," and I'm like, "Granny, those are very interesting shows for you to watch," but that's what she likes. So I'm very fortunate to have the grandmother that I had. My other grandmother, she wasn't so much into movies as she was music, so that kind of helped bolster that. But I think my grandmother was like weirdly my gateway into becoming the film fan that I am today.
Wow, extraordinary. And she's now into Vin Diesel.
Oh, big into Vin Diesel. Anytime The Pacifier is on, she has to watch the whole thing. That's her Shawshank Redemption. You know how most people, when the Shawshank Redemption is on, no matter where it is in the film, they have to watch the rest of the film? That's her with The Pacifier. She likes that. She even likes his dramatic role in Find Me Guilty, which I found that to be even crazier because it's not like he's doing the action stuff there. It's that. She didn't care too much for the Riddick films because they were too dark, like literally too dark because of her cataracts and everything. But she got a kick out of the Fast and Furious movie because of my grandfather and his passion for stock car racing and cars and everything like that. So it's been something else with her, truly.
Well, I have good news for you, Nick, because the pacifier, if you don't know already, features an exploding helicopter.
Get out of here. I haven't seen it in a while, so that's news to me.
I fear it is coming your way for a future podcast.
I'm for it. Maybe I'll even bring my grandmother on.
I think we may need to do that. But okay, I think it's not time to talk about the pacifier just yet. It's time to talk about Under Siege. So let's listen to Trailer Man give us a succinct summation of the plot.
A terrorist controls the most dangerous weapons known to man.
Bang, you're dead.
Wake up the president. But there's one weapon he doesn't control. Steven Seagal.
Are you some special forces guy or something?
I'm just a cook. Tommy Lee Jones.
This is not the work of a cook. Happy trails.
I'll see you in hell, son boy!
Under Siege. Rated R. Starts Friday, October 9th at a theater near you.
Whilst on its way to be decommissioned, a US battleship is taken over by terrorists. Led by a disgruntled ex-CIA operative, the group plan to steal the ship's nuclear weapons and make their getaway in a stolen submarine. The villains seem to have thought of every eventuality, only they haven't reckoned on the intervention of the ship's cook, a highly decorated former Navy SEAL. Alongside Steven Seagal, we have Tommy Lee Jones, Gary Busey, Cole Meany, and Erika Eleniak. The film was directed by Andrew Davis, who went on to direct The Fugitive and 2006 The Guardian, starring Kevin Costner and an exploding helicopter. Under Siege was a box office hit, grossing $156 million worldwide off its $30 million budget. It's also one of the few Steven Seagal films to have a fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Currently, Under Siege has a 6.5 user rating on IMDb and a user rating of exactly 3 out of 5 on Letterboxd. So, with all of that out of the way, Nick, what did you make of Under Siege?
I tell you what, it's a lot different than what I remember it being. I found it to just be confusing and baffling and at the same time like a lot of fun. And I think there's a genuine exciting action film buried in here, but I think it kind of gets ruined by the kind of cheesy and poor delivery of dialogue from Steven Seagal. I think if you have another actor in here and you polish up some of the dialogue, you'd have a much stronger film that I think would have made more and it would have been rated higher than what it is now. And Steven's not, I feel like he's not even in it a whole lot, despite being like the face on all the posters and DVD covers, and he's absolutely overshadowed by Tommy Lee Jones and Gary Busey, more Tommy Lee Jones than anything else. His performance, I was like, I forgot how wild Tommy Lee Jones can get. I mean, yeah, you've got his role in JFK, which is pretty absurd, but this film, I'm like, I want more of this guy. I want some more William Stranix in my life.
Well, you raise a really interesting point here, which is definitely something I wanted to mention to you about, because is this really even a Steven Seagal film? Because he's on screen for less than half of this film. I mean, I've seen numbers online that said he's only in 41 minutes of this film, and this film runs
What?
just over like 100 minutes. And Tommy Lee Jones is on screen for more time than Steven Seagal. So should we actually consider this a Tommy Lee Jones action film?
I think we should, even though he's playing the villain, and people tend to focus on the hero more than. I think Tommy Lee Jones is more like an anti-hero, like a real just misunderstood fella. He comes across and he makes some valid points. He's not one of those like I'm insane for the sake of being insane. It's I'm so fed up with the world and what's been going on that it's driven me to this point, and I'm not going to deal with it anymore. And he just goes in and he tears it up. It makes me want to go back and watch his role as Two-Face in the Batman film. I think it was at Batman Forever. Yeah, Batman Forever.
Yep.
He makes me want to go back and watch that and just remember, like, Tommy Lee Jones is a pretty versatile actor. I mean, the previous film we discussed on here, Small Soldiers, he voiced the head commando. And it was kind of neat to see that side of it. But for this film, I'm like, I just want more him being unhinged. I think he was a little loonier than Gary Busey in this role. I mean, in the film, you have Gary Busey dressing up as a woman, which I'm sure of the time is more of like, oh, look how wackadoo he is. But I really feel like that's as kind of crazy as he gets. I mean, you got Tommy Lee Jones quoting cartoon characters. He's referring to himself as the Road Runner. He's singing like the national anthem, like playing the guitar as like rockets are going off and explosions. Like he's truly out of his gourd.
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree with you. I think Tommy Lee Jones, perhaps because of his sort of hangdog face, that sort of Easter Island statue-like face that he has, he gets put in these taciturn stoic roles where you know much like No Country for Old Men where he's delivering a very flat performance, but as we see in this film, and you know you've cited a couple of other examples like something like Batman Forever, where you know he can really open up as an actor and really deliver like really sort of big engaging performances. And I completely agree. I'd love to see more of that version of Tommy Lee Jones.
And because I feel like it went away. I feel like he was a little more excitable in the beginning.
Yeah.
Right? Because you have films
Totally
like
agree.
JFK, and then a year later Under Siege comes out. But then all of a sudden and Batman Forever a couple years later. But then we go from Batman Forever to I think a year, 2 or 3, whatever, to Men in Black, where all of a sudden he's very straight-laced, very serious. And then U.S. Marshals, I think Double Jeopardy's in there somewhere. The other Men in Black films, like you mentioned earlier, No Country for Old Men, like you kind of nailed it on the head. These very stoic, very just upright military, authoritative figure. I think he's even that way in the first Captain America movie. Like he just kind of starts to play the same guy over and over, but his accent changes like a little bit, or he puts a little spin on this word or that word, or he might be a little more soft-spoken in some films versus the other. But it kind of bums me out a little bit when I see this performance versus, you know, some of the other stuff that he's done out there. I don't want him to be seen as kind of this one-trick pony kind of guy. I just want – I mean, he's a little older now, so obviously he's not going to be taking on, you know, roles of this nature unless he does like a hobo with a shotgun-esque turn like Rutger Hauer. But, yeah, he's just – I anytime he wasn't on screen, I'm like, put him on screen, or at least have him on a phone call with somebody as they walk around. Like, I just wanted more.
You know what I was also thinking as I was watching this film? I was thinking, I really wish like Tommy Lee Jones had got together some sort of blues rock band and recorded a couple of albums, because those scenes where he's performing with his band, the whatever, like the Bail Bondsman or something, or the Bail Breakers.
Billy something and the Bail Jumpers.
And the Bail Jumpers, that's it. Thanks, Nick. think he could do a half decent job as a leader of those as a leader of that kind of band.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he's kind of hanging on to that harmonica or harp, as they say, and he's nailing it. But I think he could kind of do like a George Thorogood kind of thing. Like, could you imagine him doing a cover of One Bourbon, One Scotch, One Beer? I would pay so much money for just that song, just to hear him do it once. Like, especially in this one, he's got enough of that rasp and energy to kind of get that across and convey it. He wouldn't have to be like a Leonard Cohen type where he's a little stoic and reserved. Like, he could, like you said, really get out there and kick out the jams, do a little MC5 action.
I mean, we are absolutely spoiled for choice, I think, in this film when it comes to the villains, because we have Gary Busey giving another very outlandish turn as Commander Krill here, a real like scenery chomping performance. We've also got Cole Meany in quite a small role, but there's a couple of moments in this film where he really delivers, and I really enjoy his performances in this film. And then there's I mean, you've also got there's some very like minor characters. They're kind of like the specky nerd who's part of the kind of the villains gang as well. He gets a few sort of entertaining moments. But yeah, I mean, it feels like a lot more attention was paid to the villains in this film than it was to actually Steven Seagal, and this was supposed to be his big breakout movie. This was, a massive sort of step up in terms of order of budget of the film. And yeah, it just kind of feels like, sort of either the writers or the director are just much more interested in all of the villains in this film than they were in Steven Seagal.
I think they just wrote better villains. I think they had a ho-hum action hero role, which Steven Seagal kind of fits in. But in his role, I was very confused because in the beginning of the film, he's kind of like, I don't want to say the bad boy, but he's like not wearing his dress uniform. He's kind of just subverting any and all orders from his higher-ups and officers. So part of me is like, why is he even able to do what he's doing? I'm confused about that. But then it's like he's kicking out of this Creole New Orleans kind of accent, talking about gumbo and stuff. But then later he gets back to talking like Steven Seagal. But I feel like he's just angry all the time. Like at no point is he kind of cheery until, spoilers, the very end, when he just leans in and starts kissing on Jordan Tate, Erika Eleniak's character, for like no reason. Like he's been mean to her this whole time, and finally like, let me show you guys something, and then just starts smooching away, and
it's
I'm
completely
just
unearned. That snog is completely unearned.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I find his persona in this film. I mean, it actually speaks to the sort of persona that he actually has pretty much throughout his entire career. Is that he's just a bit of a knob, frankly, and the kind of the sort of insubordination that he does is it just comes across less a comment on the authority figure that he is railing against at the time. It just comes more across about this guy's a douchebag who just can't like rein in his attitude, and he doesn't have the personality or the charisma to make the kind of that sort of line of what wise talking or insubordination actually like work and an attribute that you sort of admire. It just ends up being a sort of you just think this guy's he's too aggressive, or he's got too much of an attitude. He just comes across like an a-hole.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And they talk about his past a little bit. They keep bringing up Panama for some reason, like his entire team died or something like that. So I can see if he played like a bitter, jaded, even quiet kind of guy. But to your point, like you said, he doesn't have the charisma to pull it off. He just comes across as like an absolute jerk. And then again with this like Creole, who knows what he's doing kind of thing, and slipping in and out of it. And then like at some points it kind of sounds like he's talking jive. and trying to be buddy with some of the other soldiers who a handful of them are minorities. So it felt kind of weird. I'm like, what are you doing right now? Like, just be yourself, but don't be yourself at the same time, because it's not doing it for me.
It's really puzzling, because I hadn't watched Under Siege in a long time before this rewatch for this podcast, and obviously I can remember like a lot of the later Seagal films. He does adopt this sort of, as you say, this like Creole type, like, accent or persona, in those particular films. I mean, I don't, and so I hadn't been what I hadn't appreciated until this rewatch was actually it's right here at the beginning of his career. It wasn't something that kind of crept in later. He was actually sort of something that he was doing this early on in his career, which was, as I say, because I hadn't watched this film for a long time, hadn't appreciated that. And I kind of was looking into Steven Seagal's background. It's not like he was born in like Louisiana or anything like that. I mean, so I don't understand. I mean, I haven't done a completely extensive deep dive into the back history of Steven Seagal, but I couldn't see anything in his early life that would mean that, okay, I'm going to adopt the cultural, like, accents, mannerisms, or speech patterns of that, of that part of America. I mean, have you got any insight into why he does that?
I guess maybe it's his idea of like method, or trying to be like cool or something. I don't know. I looked it up real quick. He was born in Michigan, so that's like up north. So he should have a very different accent altogether. I know later on, like in the 2010s or something like that, wasn't he like a sheriff for a Texas police department or something like that?
Correct, but that was a lot later. So he born in Michigan, then I think he spent time in California, then he moved to Japan, then he kind of came back to California, and I think he goes somewhere else after that. But it's not like he grew up in New Orleans or something, and okay, then you could understand it or something. But as I say, I haven't done a completely extensive deep dive into his career, but I can't see anything that sort of explains why this accent just keeps cropping up so regularly in his screen appearances.
Yeah. Now, if he was living there, completely understandable. However, he's not. And I've had a thing where, like, I lived in Pennsylvania for a little while, lived in New Orleans for a little while. I've been in different parts, and I've stayed there for periods of time. And you pick up on a twang or two, or you say certain words a certain way that the locals would say it, if you will. But it's not like it's an intentional thing. You're just around it so much that you just kind of pick up on it. But if you're not living there and you try to do it, I mean, it's completely different if they talk about his character like, we pulled him out of a prison in New Orleans or Louisiana in order to become a SEAL or whatever. If you set that up in the background, okay, makes a little more sense. But to do it just to do it, I'm like, okay, like I don't understand it.
Well, there are a couple of other interesting points about this as a Steven Seagal film, because this was the first Steven Seagal film not to have a 3-word title. And at the top of the show, you mentioned some of those early Steven Seagal 3-word film titles that he had. This film was going to be called Dreadnought. People didn't like that idea, and so they did decide to try and give it a 3-word title. Do you know what that was, Nick? I mean, I can tell you if you don't.
Oh, please do tell me, because I have no idea.
It was kicked around for a while that this film could be called Last to Surrender.
No, that doesn't fit.
You're still surrendering. You're just the last. So that's not the most sort of heroic sounding title, is it?
No, not at all. I mean, if he's doing a period piece and it's the Alamo down in Texas, makes sense. Okay, I get it. But it doesn't make sense to me whatsoever.
And also, this was the first film to feature a ponytail-less Steven Seagal. So he cut off his trademark ponytail for this film.
I didn't even notice it because I was too distracted by his accent. Like, it's so ridiculous.
I mean, he did regrow the ponytail for On Deadly Ground, his follow-up film. But I don't know. I'd need to go through them. I can't off the top of my head track mentally the presence of Steven Seagal
Well,
ponytails. But
maybe he trimmed it for this film because, like, I could be making this up. I don't think you're allowed ponytails in the military, at least as a man. Like, it's got to be a crew cut. So maybe for authenticity's sake, he was like, I gotta cut my
that
hair.
was why it came off. That was why it came off. Was for the verisimilitude of this particular movie. So there you go. I mean, I mean, obviously Steven Seagal is an actor who has, well, I mean, his hair has become comedic really ever since throughout his career, whether he's had a ponytail, whatever, and obviously in later years we've got to enjoy the various. I mean, who knows what kind of combination of wig, transplant, weaves, plugs. I mean, who knows what is really behind the current follicular arrangement that sits upon Steven Seagal's head at the moment, in its very artificial looking density and darkness as well.
Yeah, and how it does. I mean, we all know it's not real, so just change up the hairstyle, do something a little bit different, and then to see him in action roles now, it's absurd. A bunch of us got together one night and we decided to watch China Salesman, and it's a film where Mike Tyson and Steven Seagal have a fight scene, and it's one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen because it's an action scene that happens early on in the film for about 5 or 6 minutes. And the rest of it is all about this like conspiracy theory found by an IT guy, and they're talking about Wi-Fi for the entirety of the film. It's a nearly 2-hour film. I wish I was making this up. It's one of the most absurd things I've seen. But you got Steven Seagal just like sitting for most of the film in hair that's unnaturally dark, like very. It's just confusing.
Wow, frankly, I'm not going to rush to see that particular movie. No.
Please don't.
You know what, Nick? I'm not sure I've got too much more to say about Under Siege. Is there anything else you've got to get off your chest about this particular movie?
I had 2 things I wanted to talk about. The first thing, and this is always going to be a pet peeve of mine for any film that has this, there's a lot of shooting done in closed, confined spaces. Everyone should be grabbing their ears at all times because of how loud and absurd it is. Like it's painful. They don't do it, and it bugs me every single time. Every time. The other thing was I forgot how much knife play is in this film. There's throwing knives. He does his weird judo hand stuff with a knife. It threw me for a loop because you see guys walking around with Uzis and submachine guns doing all this stuff. And yes, they use them mostly for like the headshot and the final kill of things. But there's a whole lot of knife play. And I was kind of happy to see that because a lot of action films, it's just kind of the same thing over and over. Right? It's a lot of gunfight, and every so often, if you get into like a martial arts film, they might use a bow staff or some other handheld weaponry. But to see a bunch of knife play, it was kind of neat.
Yeah, I enjoyed that knife fight at the end of the film between Seagal and Tommy Lee Jones. And as you say, it's not something you see an awful lot in action movies. And but having said that, if you enjoy knife fights and you enjoy Tommy Lee Jones, then you should check out the William Friedkin film, The Hunted, which also stars Benicio del Toro, because that has some excellent knife fights in. It's a bit of a frustrating film. I think the setup at the beginning of the film is mishandled. I wish that was done differently, but the meat of the film is Tommy Lee Jones trying to track down Benicio del Toro, who's this, ex-special forces soldier who's kind of, gone off the rails. And Tommy Lee Jones is his former mentor, has taught him everything he's known. And the climax of the film is that they kind of make their own like knife. Tommy Lee Jones makes his own knife out of some rocks, and then has a like hand-to-hand combat with Benicio del Toro, and it's just great William Friedkin kind of ultra masculine material. It's say the back end of that movie, really good. If you enjoy knife fights, definitely check that out.
I absolutely will. I'm gonna write that down.
Okay, I think we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be looking at the exploding helicopter action.
In Athens, Greece, the wife and children of a rich American industrialist are kidnapped and held captive in an isolated mountain monastery.
I will do nothing until I get proper food and treatment for my children.
An impenetrable fortress 5,000 feet above the city. There is no way to approach it without being killed, except from above. Now, the death-defying sport of hang gliding is the ultimate movie adventure, Skyriders. An astounding film of aerial escape and rescue. It is the one adventure that soars above them all. James Coburn, Susanna York, Robert Culp, Charles Aznavour, and the Skyriders. Men and women who can fight and fly. Rated PG.
We're back, and now we're talking about the exploding helicopter action, and we've two chopper fireballs to cover, and both of them involve a twin-rotor Kawasaki Vertol KV-107 Sea Knight. The first occurs fairly early in the film, with Seagal setting out to blow up the helicopter that the terrorists have arrived in. He uses a can of paint thinner and a grenade to make an improvised bomb. Unfortunately, the Putin apologist is spotted by the villains, who open fire on him. As the helicopter explodes, the Buddhist botherer is only able to escape by leaping over the side of the battleship onto a rope that's very handily hanging there. As for the second exploding helicopter, that occurs about 2/3 of the way through. In order to retake the ship, the military bigwigs send in a team of Navy SEALs on board a helicopter. Unfortunately, the terrorists are prepared for this eventuality, and they fire a rocket launcher from the deck of the submarine that they have to blow up the Whirlybird. So, Nick, what did you make of the exploding helicopter action?
I really enjoyed both, for two different reasons. The first one is still sitting on the deck when he blows it up. I thought it was a really creative way to blow it up, using kind of what you had around you. And I don't recall the last time we saw an exploding helicopter where it was stationary, where it was just kind of sitting there and then it gets blown up, almost like a really simple prop kind of thing. The second explosion I thought was really interesting, because not only is it a big, beautiful explosion. I mean, I don't know what it is, but the scene where he, fires the rocket launcher and he's standing there watching the explosion, it looks really good. Like, you could kind of freeze frame and frame it if you wanted to. Just the cinematography of it, which is a bizarre thing to say, I know, but it just looks good. And it's also neat to see the perspective of the guys inside as it's happening, and then we cut to the strike. Because most of the time, if we see an exploding helicopter, we see the pilot freaking out, cover his face with his hands or his arms, and then the explosion. But to see how everybody else is handling it, and then the flames start to kind of engulf it, I thought was really, really cool, and was different from what we've seen in the past. And I really, really appreciated that.
You know what? You make a brilliant point about that second exploding helicopter. I completely agree with you with the kind of, I guess, the delay that they introduce between the jeopardy that the helicopter is in and its ultimate explosion. My criticism, though, would be that the explosion of that second helicopter is really poor. I mean, it just looks like they cut back to a shot from the ship, and it just looks like some sort of firecracker going off in the distance. It's not a very it's not a very impressive chopper fireball, and I think that particular sequence would have been improved by having a bit of a bigger exploding helicopter there. Another point I want to make about that second exploding helicopter is that we see it being blown up by a rocket launcher that is being fired by someone who is standing on the deck or on the deck of the submarine, and that's quite unusual in terms of somebody. I mean, obviously not being blown up by a rocket launcher. Many helicopters have been destroyed that way, but someone firing a rocket launcher from the deck of a submarine, very unusual. And it's only been done one other time before in a film that came out, a French film that came out a couple of years ago called The Wolf's Call. But going back to that first exploding helicopter, I really enjoyed that particular sequence. I loved the kind of the improvised bomb element of it, but I also loved the explosion there. I think as much as I disliked the second helicopter, how that exploded, I think how the first one explodes is brilliant, and I love the fact that half of this, the sort of the back end of this, twin rotored helicopter kind of falls off the deck of the ship into the ocean, and I just enjoyed the way that the kind of the wreckage just crashed over the side of the ship there.
I thought that was very cool, and I also appreciated the fact that there was still like flaming debris about as they're running through a little bit later in the film, because a lot of times I don't think you see that consistency in the films. It's kind of just like, hey, we're done and on to something else. But no, the flames are still there. Obviously, they're like panicking and trying to put them out, but all that debris is still there, and it's just it's really, really cool to see because you don't get it a whole lot. I don't know, it's the little things, but it's the little things that you tend to appreciate. Somebody on that set was like, hey guys, I know he's going on about gumbo and a bouillet or whatever he's doing, but let's make sure we have this flaming debris around because it's for continuity's sake. Am I right?
Well, you clearly weren't the only person who was impressed by that particular exploding helicopter, because that particular scene, that first helicopter explosion scene, was nominated, was shortlisted for the 1993 MTV Award for Best Action Sequence.
What?
True. Very true. I mean, this is a big deal because, as long-time listeners to Exploding Helicopter will know, no film that features an exploding helicopter has ever won an Oscar. There is some strange discrimination about films that feature exploding helicopters.
That can't be true.
They don't seem to get much award recognition, but this particular sequence was, as I say, shortlisted by MTV for Best Action Sequence of the year. It lost out, though. But do you know what film it lost out to, and for what sequence?
It's 90. You said 92.
Well, it was the awards were in 93, but obviously they're doing it from the previous year. So all the films came out in 92 that were shortlisted.
Okay, let me try to think. I bet you it went to something like random.
It was a sequel. I'll give you a clue. It was a sequel.
Okay, because in my mind I'm like, oh, if it's a sequel, was it it had to have been one of the Lethal Weapons, right? Because those were around.
Oh my
time.
God!
Did I nail it?
You did.
Woo! Was it the second one?
The third one.
The third one. I thought they were later. I thought like the first one was the 80s. The second one was 90s, third was mid-90s, because the fourth one was the end of the 90s, right?
So I think first one's like 87, second one is 89, 90.
Oh, okay.
And then obviously this Lethal Weapon 3 came out in 1992. So it was the motorcycle like chase and then crash sequence that was picked. That was the award winner, was the MTV felt was the best action sequence of that year.
I don't remember that at all. I remember the first one and the fourth one.
I didn't remember it at all. I had to go and look it up on YouTube, and I mean, it's a pretty good sequence.
Okay.
I mean, if you look at, I'm afraid I can't remember all of the nominated sequences.
I was about to ask, yeah.
I was going to say none of them were terribly amazing, if I am brutally honest. So yeah, let's see if I can look it up.
They were kind of grasping at straws that year, it sounds like. Because, I mean, how can you really top an exploding helicopter and then a motorcycle sequence? Unless you have, like, a crazy, Fast and Furious-esque car race or some kind of, like, war battle between, like, mutant creatures and stuff. Like, it would have to be... or maybe a plane kind of thing, like...
Well, here we go. I've
Okay.
hauled it up in front of me on the interwebs. So the winner was obviously the motorcycle crash from Lethal Weapon 3. Under Siege, the helicopter explosion. You also had the aliens, the chase through the tunnel sequence from Alien 3, directed by David Fincher.
Okay.
The plane crash from the Hannibal movie Alive. And
Never heard of that.
Here's the most random one. I haven't seen this film, so maybe it is an amazing action sequence, but I mean, this film doesn't have the best reputation, so I'm struggling to think that there is anything in this film that would lead it to any kind of like notice by anybody. But the Oklahoma land race from Far and Away.
No
with
way.
Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. I don't know what that is. I mean, that's not even. I mean, that's a drama. That's not an action film.
So they wanted to give a award to a bunch of people literally running in a field and planting stakes. So Far and Away, I don't know why I ever watched this movie. Far and Away is this couple coming out of Ireland, and they're all coming to America to seek their fortune and everything. And when they get to about the middle of the country, they're saying, like, look, run off in the distance and stake your claim, and that land is yours. And so it's literally they're just running and trying to find, like, a plot of land to call their own. But the fact that moment they wanted it for an action sequence, like, that is – because I feel like there's, like, genuine fighting in the movie. Like,
yeah, I'm sure
think...
he does some sort of, fisticuffs, doesn't he? Brawling.
So why wouldn't that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I'm so confused.
It's very bizarre. But I do have a couple of other hopefully interesting nuggets about the exploding helicopters in this film. But when I was considering this, I think Under Siege is the only film that features an exploding helicopter that also features a real life president, because as we there's footage of George W. Bush included at the beginning of this film.
Huh.
And
okay.
The other I guess the other interesting ish point to make here is that Steven Seagal, where does he rank in terms of actors who've been in the most films with exploding helicopters? Well, he is currently joint sixth on our list of actors who've been in the most films with an exploding helicopter, having starred in 7 films that feature a chopper fireball.
I'm kind of surprised that it's not more.
Okay, I think that just about wraps things up for this show. Nick, thanks for joining me once again. Do you want to tell people where they can find you online, or do you want to plug anything you're involved in at the moment?
Yeah, 2 quick plugs. I was recently on Movies, Films, and Flicks, Mark Hoffmeyer's podcast, and we discussed the Korean foreign film Memories of Murder, the Bong Joon-ho film from 2003. And, of course, you can find me on, I guess, my podcast, Lyrical Innuendo, myself and Bubba Wheat and the occasional guest. We're going to pick a song from the annals of music history and take a look at its lyrics to determine, is it about sex, drugs, or just good old-fashioned rock and roll. If you find it on Spotify, we actually play the entire song, so this way you have an idea of what we're getting into. On other services, that unfortunately is edited out, so try to catch it on Spotify when you can.
And as always, don't forget to check out the Exploding Helicopter website at explodinghelicopter.com. If you enjoy what we do, maybe you could see it in your heart to help spread the word. I have no marketing budget, so I rely on word of mouth. We'll be back soon, but until then, what should people do, Nick?
Keep watching them there skies for those exploding helicopters.
This podcast is a proud member of the Lamb Podcasting Network. Find the network at largeassmovieblogs.com.
They go to little redhead boss.
I guess we'll just see what we'll see.
Hey, right back, man. Crow's gonna skin you alive.
Why is it now that I'm starting to shake so bad? And there's this deep, deep fear in me, thinking about Mr. Creel and all the horrible things he could do to me. Whoa!